Welcome, everybody. I'll go ahead and get things going. I'm Dr. Warren Doctor. I'm the President and CEO of the East Tennessee Historical Society, and we're very happy to have you here today. This is our inaugural first brown bag of 2024, so this is a very special occasion. We have a very special speaker. Before we get started, I would just like to say that we have some more events coming up on March 5th. We're doing a genealogical workshop on finding your sort of genetic genealogy, and we're doing another genealogy workshop on the 16th of March here at the East Tennessee History Center. And then we also have another brown bag lecture on the 27th by PhD candidate Casey Price, who will be working on allies, intrigues, and the indomitable women, 18th century Cherokee, the Anglo-Cherokee War. And so we would like to encourage everyone to come and for everyone to join the ETHS, which is the East Tennessee Historical Society, in case you're not a member. And now, without further ado, a little bit about our speaker today. I first got to know him personally when we were doing our exhibit on the 1982 World's Fair, and he was a tremendous help and came and he spoke. He's been many things. In fact, he wrote a book on all the things he was. His previous book, which is called Forever Young. He's been a newspaper editor. He was a vice president of the University of Tennessee. I think the youngest ever vice president. Isn't that right, Bo? And he was a chief of staff for the Tennessee Governor, Bufford Ellington. And he is currently running a consultancy company, which is headquartered in Nashville, called Robert Strategy. And he has been a huge presence, I think, not just in Tennessee, but in Knoxville. And he has done a whole lot for this city, particularly with the 1982 World's Fair and more. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Bo Roberts talking about his new book, Flaming Moderate. Thank you very much, Bo.
One of the real joys of speaking in this edifice is the guy that introduces me. We have become friends, but I just love to say, thank you, Doctor. There's no other place I could ever use that, so I want to come back here for that reason alone. One of the things that came out from my office, or somebody around my office, so weeks ago, they said, celebrated author Bo Roberts, And I thought, how can they say that? What do they mean? And I finally figured it out, because with us today is first my wife, who also happens to be my editor, and she's tough as hell, and in both regards. But I figured it out that if our marriage survived 2 damn books, then we can celebrate after each book we come out with. It's worth a celebration. Now, let me do a commercial, and I'll start talking about my book. Well, this is talking about it too. But at the end of this presentation and question and answers, or you have questions, and I'll try to provide answers if you have them. If you have suggestions, that's okay. If you want to throw bricks, throw them somewhere else. But anyway, there will be some. If you didn't bring your book to be signed and you want one signed, we happen to have a few that you could purchase here, and also happen to have a few of the first book, because it's funny that a couple of engagements we've already had, people say, "Well, I want to. What about your?" They missed the opportunity to purchase that first book, Forever Young, which covers the World's Fair. It's kind of how it ended. So that's my commercial. They'll be available. 3 o'clock in the morning. Most people aren't doing much. I was trying to sleep in Sevierville years ago. Got kind of something, noted a flashing light out toward the front of the house, and I got up and kind of looked at it, and lo and behold, it was a burning cross that the KKK had invaded and quietly set it afire. Didn't make a lot of noise, but it was pretty bright. And then they snuck off, and I don't know if somebody, it may have been my neighbor Johnny Waters, may have called the volunteer fire department, and that's the whole story in of itself. Sevierville's so big now you wouldn't know it, but they look at their big fire hall when I go there, and I can't believe it. But the druggist and the hardware store guy and all these guys would come pouring out of their homes when they hear that siren, go to the fire department, get and probably the most proficient group I've ever seen, certainly the most dedicated group I've ever seen. Anyway, they came, but they didn't turn their sirens on. 1 o'clock in the morning, they came and put the fire out, which wasn't much. It's about best I remember, about a 12, 14 foot tall, and it was beginning to flame out a little bit. They put a little water on it, came down, cinders kind of came down, and then went on. Wasn't too afraid of it. I wasn't scared for some reason. It was kind of amusing in a way. But what led up to that was an encounter that had occurred over several weeks. First, they came to my office in Sevierville and wanted to buy some printing about an event they wanted, a rally they wanted to have. And I don't know if the Supreme Court would have approved it or not, but I said no. I wouldn't do their printing. They'd have to go somewhere else. And I decided at that point, it was the worst decision, one of them among the worst decisions I ever made, to just say, I'm going to forget about it. I'm going to ignore what they're doing. And they had a little out-town Walnut Creek, I think it was, Johnny B. I think you call it when you came into town on the left, coming in from Knoxville. And they had a little rally out there I heard about. Not much going on. And I didn't mention anything in the paper, newspaper about it. I was editor of the paper at the time. And then if they kept coming and kept doing some things, and the reason they were coming to Sevier County, their state headquarters was in Blount County in Maryville, and the head dragon was from there, but Sevier County had decided to integrate our schools, which we had supported in the newspaper. Integration in Sevier County was a pretty small move. There was basically one sort of extended family out near Kodak that lived in Sevier County. It was less than 1%, and decided that it made sense to integrate. Not just because it was so small, but also it made good sense and it was the right thing to do. But that brought the Ku Klux Klan out. That Saturday of the cross burning in my yard, during the day, they paraded throughout the town, handing out pamphlets that somebody had printed to bring people to this rally in the courthouse yard by the Klan. They'd built a large stage up there, and had the Grand Dragon up there. They all had this really ornate costumes on. They didn't cover their face; that was against the law. But you could see their faces if you wanted to. Not many people want to. But anyway, he started speaking, and my friend and neighbor, Johnny Waters, whose name you'll hear several times, I was going there to kind of cover it for the newspaper, and he was going there as a friend and a bodyguard. I don't know what he just, Johnny and I were as close as friends. And he drove, and we went down. And driving was about probably less than a mile to the courthouse, when you say Johnny B. And so it wasn't a long drive. And he parked by his law offices downtown. And during this guy's speaking, he started attacking me, using my name, attacking me personally from there. And I was kind of amused at that. And then he said the worst thing you could ever say about a newspaper person. He said, he doesn't know what's going on. And I'm not a vociferous person in public, and not one to make a scene. But I just yelled out, "Do you?" And everything just kind of stopped, got immediately quiet. All of a sudden, these oafs that were dressed as military policemen, had walked up and down the streets handing out these pamphlets. They were kind of like a military police for the Ku Klux Klan. All of a sudden, about three of them came up. One of them said, "Hold it down, buddy." And again, I'm not a reactionary person in that time, but it just flew all over me. I said, how in H with you can be in my courthouse yard telling me to do anything? And we started yelling back and forth. And I never will forget this one little guy. It's like most small towns, where a group of us get together for coffee sometimes up near a filling station, and others around, kind of hanging around. This little guy was there, and he was always listening. And he's about half my size, and he said, these guys were twice my size. He said, "Bo, you get that, and I'll get these two over here." And Johnny said, I think maybe we ought to think about kind of easing out of this, because I don't know what it might have become, but it wasn't going to be anything pleasant, and that wasn't again, I wasn't there to be part of the story. I wanted to cover the story, but at that time, I'd become part of it. So we eased on out, went home, and then later that night, we woke up 3 in the morning seeing that. And they continued. The Ku Klux Klan, they'd call my then wife, and say, when is he coming home tonight? Or who's he out with? What's this going on? All kinds, and we had the police and the sheriff's office ask us every time we get a call to report it, and we not to do anything about it, but it kept going like that, and it kind of finally died down. And then the thing that killed it, that finally just stopped their activity in Sevier County, was the Ministerial Association in Sevier County, which is all the churches, all denominations, mostly Christian, but all denominations got together, met, and every single church and every single pastor signed a resolution condemning the Ku Klux Klan, saying they weren't welcome in Sevier County, and that they would prefer that they not make any more efforts to do anything. And that pretty well ended it. When you get all the churches on one piece of paper, and I don't know how many of them, there may be one or two that begrudgingly signed that. I don't know, but they all signed it, and we felt good about that. So it kind of went away. A few weeks later, I got a call, and this two young, nice-looking young men came up to. We had our printing operation was in Gatlinburg. We had an office, a newspaper in Sevierville, newspaper in Gatlinburg. Printing was done in Gatlinburg, and I was up there at that office. They wanted to come up, and again, they were smart in that they wanted to. Said they were young, no, obviously, but they were journalism students at UT, where I had graduated, and they were doing a paper and a story about successful UT graduates. Well, you appeal to my ego, of course. I'm glad somebody's called me successful. So come on up. And they came up, and they sort of interviewed me. We talked some, and I'd ask them about these professors. Well, we hadn't had them yet. And I said, okay. And they wanted to get a picture, and they had a Polaroid. Remember what Polaroid? Yeah, I see some gray hair in here, so most of us remember Polaroids. But it took them about 8 shots before they finally got one. They were so nervous and taking it. I thought, well, young guys, And so they finally got what they wanted, and they left. And I didn't think anything else about it. About a year, maybe a little less than a year later, I, in the meantime, had been offered and take a job with Southern Bell at the time, and headquartered in Atlanta in their marketing department, and I took the job, and we moved to Atlanta. I was down there, and one day in my office, I got a call from a reporter with Life magazine. And he said, "Can we have lunch?" And I said, "Yeah," but he said, "Well, I'm doing this series of stories, on a big story on the Ku Klux Klan." He'd gone underground with them one time. And I saw your name mentioned, and I wanted to talk to you. I said, "Well, sure." So we got at lunch, and I went to lunch meeting. He pulled out, and I'm still mad that I didn't find some way to get a copy of this. Pulled out their national publication. It's called The Fiery Torch. And that's right, Lee. I had it wrong for years, but Lee, Fiery Torch, that's the name of it. Anyway, and up above the fold, I'm a newspaper guy, I look at stuff like that, above the fold had a picture, a large, 2-column picture of me. And I knew where the picture was when it was taken, because at that time, when these guys had come to I was letting my hair grow out. I'd been a crew cut guy all my life until just before, a few weeks or whatever before, I was letting it grow out. I was in that stage when it was like, yeah, it didn't look like a buzz cut, and sure didn't look like it was grown out, so I knew exactly when that picture was taken. And they had gone to all that trouble, and they kind of, and the article was not very flattering to me, as you could imagine. Called me a communist was probably the nicest thing they called me, and a bunch of other stuff. And again, we didn't have cell phones then. I couldn't take a picture. I didn't think about taking it to somewhere in a hotel or whatever and get. But anyway, I have that memory, and we've searched in writing Forever Young. We've researched, tried every way in the world, and not surprisingly, the Ku Klux Klan doesn't have a Library of Congress type presence. And we couldn't track that down. We did track down that the the guy who was Grand Dragon of Tennessee became Grand Dragon of the whole country later on. Anyway.
It was the fiery cross.
Cross.
Yeah, it was the torch.
It was the fiery cross. I knew it. I always used to say fiery torch, and then we looked it up, and it was fiery cross. So I want to get correct. Why do I share that story? Well, I saw prejudice, I saw hatred, I saw intolerance, and I saw it build in me. If somebody said, "What do you hate?" I'd have to say it pretty close to the Ku Klux Klan, come up there pretty quick. What are you intolerant about? I'd have to say the intolerance of this organization. And yet it worked out in terms of my own personal and in Sevierville and in most of the country. It worked out. There's still remnants of it, and I guess actually still parts of it that's still there in other organizations of similar like. But that's the extreme, and it's began to realize, I guess, that the extreme on either side doesn't get things done. They stir up emotions, they stir up hatred, they stir up dislike, and so that is so people say, what's flaming moderate? Why flaming? Well, that's a literal flame, and I had other figurative flames and different things in my life, and then those of you who are around. I know you're all old enough, most of you are, for the World's Fair. Remember the logo, it's a flame. That wasn't my choice. I didn't think of it in that direction, in that vein at that time. So what the title means to me, Flaming Moderate, is keep hope. Keep, that things can work out. Keep that ember burning. I don't care how dim it may get and how hopeless it may seem. Try to keep it burning. And then what is a moderate? And I spend a lot of time on going back to my friend Johnny Waters, Georgiana, what do you call him? A known Republican or a known Republican leader that for generations. But he was my neighbor, and we used to sit out in the front yard and talk politics and back and forth, and found out we agreed so much more than we ever disagreed, and partisan things really weren't that important. And through him, because Johnny was the roommate and classmate of Howard Baker, in law school, maybe an undergraduate as well. And through him, I got to know Howard Baker. That's before he ran for office, and what a prince of guy and a history. And I won't go into it all now because most of you probably know it better than I. But he is what is a moderate? I used him as, this would be my definition. His life, his political life, and what he did of bringing people together. And his saying was, as you know, remember that listen to the other side because occasionally they may be right. And the whole Baker School now at the University of Tennessee, which I'm so proud of and so proud that they're in the direction they're taking in civility and in political leaning and knowledge, is that and they have a podcast among two governors, one a Democrat, Governor Bredesen, and Bill Haslam, a Republican, called "You May Be Right." And it's very interesting. If you hadn't had a chance, look into that. And it's two guys that I mention quite often in my book, because the book itself contains over 3 different decades, from the 2000s, the teens and the 20s so far, columns that I've done over the years. And some of them are, most of them are directly political, some of them are indirectly, are issues that became political, such as major investments and so forth. But Bredesen and Haslam are mentioned in several different columns in several different ways, but most all of them very, very, very positive at people who, one is a Democrat and one is a Republican. I suspect that they're kind of like Johnny and I sitting in the backyard. There's not much difference between the two. And they enjoy talking about and looking for solutions as opposed to positions, looking for results as opposed to activity, looking for results as opposed to just activity. And we have a lot of people now that on both sides, on the clowns and the jokers, that love to make activities. They love to stir things up, but sometimes they want to stir it up more than they want to try to get things done. Somebody asked me once, is this a book, is it just an anti-Trump book? And I said, no, it's not. I end up not being very favorable to our former president, which probably wouldn't surprise, well, I know it wouldn't surprise anybody that knows me, but wouldn't surprise most of my friends, because they had the same, a lot of my friends had the same views. But some of the early columns I did, like one the day after he was elected, saying the last straw was, I thought, frankly, during that race, when the locker room talks came out, you remember that? I thought, well, that's the last straw. He'll never survive that. Well, he did. And then I said, where is that last straw? When does the last straw get on there that takes that camel's back of democracy and breaks it? And he's still searching for it. It's still piling on up there. When he did started the relationship with the North Korean premier, and I thought, well, that guy's crazy, but who knows? That might be good, because I went back, because he's getting attention. I went back to a World's Fair experience and thinking of when we started working to try to get China as our main tenant at the World's Fair. Some of you may remember. Soviet Union they withdrew because we had withdrawn from the Olympics, and we had withdrawn from the Olympics in Moscow in 1980 because they invaded a country that we never heard of, Afghanistan. Where in the world's that? Kind of heard some sense, but they invaded Afghanistan. We pulled out of the Olympics. They pulled out of the World's Fair. They were our largest. They were our anchor tenant. They were our Macy's in a development sense, in a shopping center. And so we turned focus on China, who had never, in their mind, the country had never been to a World's Fair or anything like it. And we started working on it. But when I went over there the first time and started going around, they would take me around and say, this is the restaurant that Kissinger gave this toast. This is the area that President Nixon did these things. It was the fact that the U.S. had recognized them. I know Nixon didn't do a lot of things. He got run out of office, but he did a lot of good things, and that was one of them. And only he could have done it. A Democrat tried to do that. They just said, this communist, get him out of here. But Nixon, the hard Republican, hardliner, going to communist China and recognizing them and getting them to be a part of the world, no other president could have done that. No other, not person, but no other president that wasn't in that position, in my mind, in my opinion, and I may be wrong. But anyway, that's that recognition. So I thought, well, maybe North Korea, they have somebody that recognizes them. Maybe that will turn into something good. Maybe that, who knows? It didn't, but it might have. And so I was very positive on that, and end up not so positive in some other things related to our former president. One of the probably third or fourth from last, I don't know, I can remember exactly right now, the columns I did related to the World's Fair. Some things going on in our legislature and back and forth and different things. And the title basically was When Bipartisanship Mattered. And I use the World's Fair as an example. This will be closing with this, and one of the little thing. But I call it hyper bipartisanship that was needed. It wasn't nice that we had Howard Baker and Jim Sasser. It wasn't nice that we had a Republican president, a Democratic president, and then a Republican president to deal with nationally. We had a Democratic governor and a Republican governor who defeated our chairman of the board, who took a leave of absence to run. Jake Butcher was beaten by Lamar Alexander, premier, thank goodness. And we survived that. So I don't know, maybe not remember this one. Jake Butcher was president of the largest bank in East Tennessee, which is important that they be for us. And the vice chairman of our board was Jim Haslam, who was on the board of the second largest bank in East Tennessee. Obviously one a huge Democrat fundraiser, and Jim Haslam nationally is one of the largest Republican fundraisers and influencers, whatever you want to call it. Everybody knows Jim Aston, great guy. And so Jake took a leave of absence. Jim stepped up to be chairman of our board. As we went through that, we stayed out. We had too much to do anyway. Stayed out of the election. End up, Jake lost and got the nomination, but lost. And it's very important if you put something like this together. You got to have your local government, and which we went through 2 mayors. You got to have your state government, went through 2 governors, and you got to have the national government, went through three presidents: Ford, Carter, and Reagan. And if you had any of those say it's not going to happen, it wouldn't have happened. If you'd said either of our senators had said, I'm against that. If Howard Baker said, tell Reagan, hey, forget that thing, let it happen. It wouldn't have happened. It wasn't. And when going after China, we were using every chit we had anywhere we could get it, Republican, Democrat, business, whatever, going and putting it together, trying to do anything we could and everything we could in a very short time to get that nation, and we were successful at it. But the whole thing throughout was, I call it hyper bipartisanship. It wasn't Republican and Democrat. It said, are we going to do this or not? Now, some people think, well, maybe you shouldn't do it. I remember one interview I had with an NBC reporter right before the fair opened. She came up and said, she said, well, our World's Fair is necessary. And I said, no, absolutely not. They're not necessary. What do you mean? He said, well, they're not necessary. A great symphony is not necessary. An opera is not necessary. A football game is not necessary. But thank God for unnecessary things of life. And so that's, we put together something that wasn't necessary, but I think had an impact. And when I saw the thousands of people coming through every day, to more than 11 million total, and saw that on their faces, the joy of what they were seeing and experiencing. I remember telling the conductor of the Knoxville Symphony, they appeared just about every day at the Tennessee Amphitheater. If you remember where that was, still there, by the way, still in use. And he complained one day about the ambient noise, outside it wasn't, people walking and talking and other things going on and other noise. And I remember telling him, I said, I don't know, I understand it's not, so controlled, but there are thousands of people, those people walking by, they may hear a note or two of your symphony, and that may be the only note or two of symphony they've ever heard and ever will hear in their life. So thank God that you have the opportunity to share that with people who didn't look to come there. I didn't come to the World's Fair to hear a symphony orchestra, but maybe they heard a few beats. Maybe they saw something in one of the pavilions that they didn't know about. So anyway, it took a bipartisan effort. And that would be my theme. And one of the things I end with, and Georgiana, thank you for mentioning it, but on the cover of the book, it's a picture of the flag, and in the white stripes, it has what I have slightly edited, a pledge that we had made in 1776, that I'm asking that we come together to re-pledge for 2026, which will be the 250th anniversary of our founding of our nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people, and it originally says all men, all people are created equal, and we are endowed by our creators, rather than creator, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what I say basically, and I may not be right, but is that if we can agree on that, I have this thing turned off. I got witnesses that I turned it off for. If we can agree on that little pledge that if we can't agree on that, then we're probably having trouble communicating. But if we can agree on that, that at least is a start toward getting together and looking for not jokers, not clowns, or clowns, not jokers, and that we can come together and have some results. Thank you for listening. Now, I'll take your questions, observations, brickbats, whatever you got. Thank you. By the way, I meant to say that you can go to our website. You don't have to buy anything to take this pledge. Just go to flamingmoderateBook.com, and it gives you where you can sign up, pledge. You can sign your family up. No cost. This is not a gimmick. It's a way for us to start express ourselves. So that's there for you. All right. Now, any questions, comments?
How did you get involved in the World's Fair?
I used to say they let me out of an insane asylum, and they captured me. I was in the process of going back to the University of Tennessee. I'd been with them for a while and doing some business, and we were talking, and the early days of the World's Fair with the mayor's office, TVA, UT, the Chamber of Commerce, and all these different entities were working together with the Department of Commerce to try to put this together and make it happen. And finally, the U.S. Department of Commerce said, time out. We need a point. We need one entity to go to, whether it's the mayor's office or whoever. And so they decided to form a nonprofit corporation, and they needed to get somebody to just be the point person. And I talked to me about it, and I agreed initially for 6 weeks of consulting to set up the basic operation, the legal parts of it and everything else, and get it going, get a budget, and just in a way to seek revenue and so forth. And that 6 weeks turned into 7.5 years. So I got a little bit involved, I guess, and it never got uninvolved. Yes, ma'am.
How did you decide to go into journalism, and what other papers have you been associated with?
Well, how did I decide to get into journalism? I joined the Air Force right out of high school, so I could qualify for the GI Bill. And so I had a 4-year enlistment, spent 3.5. During that time, I started taking a few correspondence courses in English and different things from University of Maryland. And I don't know, I just got into liking, I wasn't that I was a good writer, but I just enjoyed communicating and writing. I'd always loved sports. So when I got in, I thought, well, I'll get in, I'll be a sports editor someday. That'd be my ultimate goal. And but I took some more courses, and the last station I was at, I'm sorry, it's harder to give short answers anymore, so I apologize. But I'm trying to explain it to myself, I guess, too. On the base I was in communications, and we dealt with the communication system and doing a code system, and it's nuclear codes and different things. And but I went to the base. It was a small base, a new base that had base created. I went to the base head of the special services and said, we ought to do a base newspaper. So I talked him into doing a base newspaper, and I told him I was. You'd have thought I was a pretty experienced journalist at that time. I'd written a couple of letters to the editor that had been published, I think, something like that, and I don't think they had to edit them too much. So they set me up in the libraries where the special services headquartered to do this newspaper. And I'll finish with this to show you how unknowing I was. That during the time there was a visiting from another base colonel that came by to come in, and the captain was walking him through here, and I'm set up my little office there in the library. And he told him we're doing getting ready to do a base newspaper. And he said, oh, well, how many pages are you looking at? And I said, well, I think 7 or 8. And he kind of looked at me and he says, oh, okay, and walked on. Well, as anybody in the newspaper business knows, or printing business knows, you can have 8, but you ain't gonna have 7. That 8 may be blank, but you ain't gonna have a 7-page anything printing. That's how dumb I was at that time. How uneducated all the way I should have been. But when I came to journalism school, they felt like I was I was one of the older one in there because I'd been out of school, high school a few years. But anyway, so it always kind of fascinated me. And I got into it over at UT and just loved the guys that were there, and they're all guys at that time.
Who was there at the time?
Yeah.
Who were the faculty at that time?
The head of it was W.C. Tucker. It was a school of journalism at that point in the College of Business. John Lane, Cal Chauvin.
Dr. Leiter.
No, Leiter was later. He was after me. Tucker, young Tucker. Yeah, he was the marketing guy, as I recall. And that's the only ones I can remember. Cal Chauvin.
Adamson. Wasn't she there? June Adamson?
No, she wasn't there when I was there.
It was all men? Well, they couldn't have turned out very
Yeah.
good journalists.
Yep, all men at that time. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of questions.
Mhm.
I'm curious your definition of creators on here, on your book. And I'm also curious how, two things, how and if you believe the state of Tennessee could ever be purple. I'm not going to say blue, but let's go for purple.
As long as you don't say when, because I don't think it's going to be my lifetime. But anyway.
That's pretty broad.
Yeah, but on the first one, my thoughts there on creators rather than creator, because I guess I was limiting in my thinking, at least the thinking of the founding fathers of thinking of one creator, we are such a diverse country, and so many different people have so many different ways of worshiping or not worshiping. That create, so whatever you think is your creator, to be among the creators. Just try to broaden it. I'm not saying it's right. That's just what I thought.
No,
And then your question was about when do we come purple?
can you imagine it, and what do you suggest?
Well, we're headed down some difficult paths. I don't get into very much at all, I don't think, of our current office holders. I say the jury's still out in some people's minds. It's not quite as far out as in mine, maybe, as some others. But right now, the control factor of one party is just, it's 2/3 or 3/4 to 1/4, basically. And I can remember when it was 2/3 to 1/3 the other way, when I was in the governor's office. And I can remember in a Democratic administration, we worked with, I was just talking to Carolyn Jensen about it earlier, her late husband, Tom, Ben Atchley, some of you may remember, Tommy Garland, I could go on and name these Republican legislators. They were a part of the team. We worked together as to what we're going to do, and we'd meet every morning with the leaders of both parties, and then something come up and say, well, that's partisan. Okay, well, you do what you got to do, and we'll do what we got to do, but let's get back together and talk about what we're going to do, and so the respect and involvement. I mean, we weren't just doing it to be nice. We do it because they had something to offer. They were brilliant people. Tom Jensen and others that I'm named were just people who had something to contribute, both politically and policy-wise and administrative-wise. And things worked better that way. A lot of people don't even remember, again, sorry about the long answer, but during Ellington's term, the second 2 years, Republican, the vote in the House of Representatives, there were 49 Democrats, 49 Republicans, and one independent who lived in Knoxville, who voted with the Republicans. So we had a Republican House the last few years. The guy elected Speaker, dear friend, you might have heard, Bill Jenkins. Bill Jenkins was Speaker of the House from Sneedville, Rogersville, actually, and later Congressman, later judge, or maybe judge and then congressman. I'm not sure, but he's been a lot of things. And because I asked one time, I was introduced him, I said, "What? How do I introduce you? How do I refer to you?" And in fact, in my book, on thanks to a lot of people who've been influencers of me, I said I didn't use titles because some of them I used him, I think, as an example of why I didn't say, was it Congressman Jenkins or Speaker Jenkins or Judge Jenkins? And, well, yes, all. Anyway, so, but I think that what I see, what I fear, and what I see kind of happening, and I do mention this in the book toward the end, is going back to an old saying of an English gentleman a century and a half ago, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you get so far and so much, you can do most anything you want. And I think we're seeing some examples of that. How far, because you have the power and you don't respect the other side, you can put up these rules to do whatever you want to do. And you keep getting more and more. And eventually, I think it came back to bite them a little bit when they expelled the two guys. And I don't condone misbehavior in a legislative body. I don't condone people trying to disrupt, but I don't condone, expelling somebody. One of those guys now has $1 million in his campaign fund because nationally they became heroes. So that was a little bit of it bit back. Now did it cripple them? No. Did it slow them? A tad maybe, but not much. And so I'm hopeful. I'm still hopeful that there will be I guess what I would say, if I could sum up what I would like to see happen, is for the majority party to have candidates who are more concerned about doing something, say, for education instead of to education. That they're more interested in doing something for the health of people and parents choosing than to the health and parents choosing. And eventually, I think we can get there. And it's not going to be, it's never going to, this state's not going to be democratic in my lifetime. I'm pretty sure I can make that bold statement. But at the same time, I'm hoping it can move at least toward the middle and toward a direction a little more purplish. And one of my columns in the book is color, wishing for a purple state. And several years ago, I can't remember exactly what it was. Anyway, long answer. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you had any ideas about if social media had been as prevalent in the time that you were working on the World's Fair as it is now. Would it have been a hindrance or an aid or either?
I think I got your question about the influence of social media in this day and time.
Like at the time that you were working at the World's Fair and being able to have some bipartisan communication, do you think that if social media had been as prevalent then?
That's a really good question.
That's a very good question.
And I don't, whatever side I take, you can take the other side in a hurry, because I don't know that I know. But I know that it's, I have a gentleman, young person that I employ part-time, and basically it's to help me through the IT, help me take things and convert it into Facebook and LinkedIn and social media, and to interpret social media, try to keep up with it. And I can, I can do emails, I can answer emails, I can do several things. But we kid it with my friend. I said, I can almost do it now, but the day I can learn to cut and paste, I'll know that I've gone to a new plateau. So that tells you about where I am on that. But I'm still trying. I can almost do it. I think but I'm always afraid if I cut, will I ever get it back again? So anyway, but social media it's changed the face of communication, the world of communication in the world. More rapidly than I think anybody could have thought. I'm reading a book right now on the history of the New York Times, and it's right at the period when the old guard is having to say, what are these new people doing with this online stuff? And we're not, that's not the times. You have to be, older and 50 years experience to be, anyway, it's watching them go through it as I guess a lot of us. So I don't know what the answer is. One of the things that scares me though, I have a young lady that one of my clients that I work with, who's probably in her, she may be 27. That's about as old as she could be, maybe 26. Brilliant young lady who knows the algorithms and she purchases advertising for a couple of my clients, and she just kind of grew into this and to that. But she can, and in advertising, it doesn't mean in the New Sentinel or on WATE or it's on Amazon, on social media, on you know that's where the influencers seem to say they're going now. But she understands all that, and she knows that you can do the algorithms here, and if you're looking for this kind of audience, you do this. And she told me, this was about 5 or 6 months ago, we were having lunch, that she is concerned because she didn't know enough about AI, artificial intelligence. And when she says that, I mean, she's three plateaus above me, and she's concerned about AI. I surrender. I'm going to have to depend on her or others to control. I think it looks like an asset, but if properly controlled. And I think social media is a tremendous communicator, but it's when it's used for the right things. And I don't know the answer, but I do know, I think it makes it more difficult for people to come together and people to communicate, because there are those that will come out against, a politician can say something, well, I think I'm going to, well, I've given examples in some of my columns where a politician says, I'm going to work with the other side to see if we can't, because I know something about this, and he immediately gets attacked from, in this case, the far right, saying you can't work with the other side. And the same thing on the other side. But I mean, it's not. I think it's not. It's not captured. The problems aren't captured by either party. They're captured by both parties. I think the weight of the problem now is so many in our state, and then to split nationally. So many in the Republican Party, I think, are willing and want to be more moderate, but they're almost afraid to be because of who their spokesman is. And I think it's going to take getting past that, and then a reshuffling and a reshaping, and hopefully, and it took that somewhat. If you saw the change in Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker the first time, and when she was Speaker the second time, having been voted, the other party taking control, the Pelosi of the her second term, if you want to put it that way, take a look at that and her pronouncement. She was far less liberal. She was far more open to compromise. She's far more open to working with the Republicans. So a couple of defeats, a couple of things can maybe head us in that direction. Sorry about the long answer. You. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Hey.
On a personal note, where were you? Excuse me. Where were you born and raised, and how did your parents and your upbringing influence you for the man that you are today?
Good or bad, they eat both ways. I was born in Akron, Ohio. My father is from East Tennessee. He grew up in his family in Wheat, Tennessee. Anybody know where Wheat, Tennessee is? A couple do, all right. It's between Anderson and Roane County. They lived in, his family his particular family ended up with the family burial places in Wheat. And my ancestors on my father's side fought on the Union side, as many in East Tennessee did. My father's family was, up until him, was Republican. The reason he was working in Akron, Ohio when I was born is because of the Depression. And so he no longer was a Republican. He was a Depression Democrat, as many called him, and a bunch of them came out of that. They were strong on the Democratic side. He moved back, and I moved with him. I didn't have a choice, to East Tennessee when I was I'd finished the first grade in Akron, moved back here. grew up, I was in Oak Ridge for a while, and then to Harriman. So I grew up and graduated from Harriman High School. I used to brag about people say, well, I'm in sports so much. Well, oh yeah, I was all-city football and baseball player. Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't like to add that we only had one city school, you know. So it wasn't that difficult. But anyway, my parents were good parents. We were not wealthy at all. We were not poor. I never wanted for anything. Christmas was an embarrassment in so many ways, and we had a good life. I do know that they grew up in the time of segregation as being part of their life, part of their family's life. It wasn't partisan. It wasn't Democrat or Republican. It was just a way of life. I don't know if I can share this exactly, but there were sayings that they would say, to us, to me and my brother as youngsters, that we'd pick up something and put it in our mouth, and they said, don't put that in your mouth. It might have had it in its mouth. It wasn't that bugs might have been on it. It was because of somebody of a different race might have had it in their mouth. And that was just something they grew up with, the hearing. And as time went on, I saw people driving by my high school to go to Rockwood from Oliver Springs. You know where Oliver Springs is? You know where Rockwood is? Harriman's in the middle. People from Oliver Springs, blacks, were driving by Harriman to go to Rockwood to the one county black school that existed at that time. And that wasn't right. And then Martin Luther King was I read some of his and some other things, and I went to my parents. I think I was 15, and asked them if they would not use the N-word when I was in the house, and they said yes. They didn't from that day forward. I'm not saying, and I know they were not. They were good people who were not prejudiced, but prejudice was that was a way of life. It wasn't that they said one day, "I hate hens," or it was just the way life was. I would put them in that category, and so yes, it influenced me, but also that their acceptance of my wishes at that time was a great influence. Now, I'm not saying that made anything great happen, but I appreciate that. But I've good raising by good people, church going, and I went to church most of the time, and left the church one time when I had a banker who was my Sunday school class teacher, and he started on anti-Catholics and just ripping them up. And I had two good buddies that played on football with me in high school for a member of the Catholic family. And so I didn't join, but I went to the Catholic church, attended the Catholic church for a year after that, just out of protest. I didn't convert, didn't do anything, but it started little doubts of organized religion began creeping in, I guess, at that point. Not to everybody. Anyway, probably too long an answer, but best I can do. Anybody else? Well, thank you all very much. What? Yes, sir.
Yeah, how long were you in journalism, and do you see the changes over the years, for better or for worse?
Well, how long was I in journalism? I physically employed in the newspaper business about 4.5 years out of college. During that time, I had some offers from Sentinel and Chattanooga Times, and frankly, because I had such a great boss and owner and publisher up there, I couldn't take the pay cut to go to work for them at that time, where the Guild was. And then I had this offer to go into marketing with Southern Bell. I left it. And then I came back. Frankly, I didn't have a great experience there. They were a great company. It's just I wasn't cut out. And when I got an offer from UT to head up their news bureau, which I think is journalism, it's paid journalism, I guess you'd say. But basically, it was like I was here in a minute. I came up, interviewed, yes, accepted, bought a home, and moved the family back, and spent a little less than 2 years there. And it was basically I was writing. It was taking things that were happening at the university and putting them out to the media across the state and that type of thing. So I guess I could claim that. And then the former governor came back to some of his friends at UT and said he needed help. And they set up, and I went and interviewed and went to work and started with the governor and got into politics, went on from there. Came back to UT, not in journalism. But I think in the beginning of this century, toward the end of the last century, beginning of this century, I began to start writing again and doing columns. People said, what's the regularity? Are they monthly or weekly? I said, just when I feel like it, when I want to say something. So that's kind of a luxury, I guess, in a way. I wasn't paid for those. I wasn't paid journalism, but it was a lot of fun to get those out. Anything else? All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Story's right over here.